Practice of ethnographies has contributed to the establishment of hierarchies within many civilizations throughout history. Be it in the Indian or across the globe in Mexico, ethnographers had the power to recreate their own story, one that portrays people in a specific way that can often be characterized as what we aren't seen compared to what we actually are. It was in this that the colonizers were able to shape the people in India and Mexico into certain groups, some favorable, some not, and use this to justify their power over the native peoples.
Here we can see two photographs. The first picture shown on the left was taken in the year 1902 and is entitled Governors of an Empire of Nations by Underwood and Underwood. On the right, we can see a photograph taken in the year 1859. This photograph is by William Johnson entitled Lohanas. Between these two photographs, we can see the stark contrast that is established by simple changes to the environment in which a photograph is taken. In other words, in each picture, a separate, entirely unique message is communicated. On the left side, we can see many men lined up, sitting with their legs and arms crossed in perfect posture. We can assume the photograph on the left depicts British colonizers for a few reasons. Those men are not captured at any place of work. Rather, they're sitting posed for the photograph with satisfied looks on their faces. Furthermore, all of these men are white, wearing nice, dainty suits and appear very clean. On the right side, we can see three men. These men seem to have almost sad or distraught looks on their faces. Furthermore, these three men are all wearing clothes that look to be worker clothes, rather than the nice suits the men on the left are wearing. Photographs of this time period were dehumanizing of Indian culture and people, as the Europeans used Indians to make ethnographic photography to portray the Indian culture to their preference. Indians' photos were taken against their will and, quote, hunters were detained for a few days by the photographer and were in a state of constant fear that they were being held captive to be sacrificed later, end quote. Thus, the Indian people against their will were the main subjects of violent Europeans trying to proclaim their dominance. Being taken from their natural habitats and placed in studios for photos was an example of this dehumanizing method of Europeans using their power to manipulate the world's viewpoint of Indians.
Similarly, the image titled British Engineers captured at the Bengal-Nagpur Railway is consistent with the manner in which Europeans are typically depicted in Indian ethnography. Unlike images which capture Indians, those which depict Europeans during this time almost never capture them engaging in manual labor or other work associated with the lower class. Instead, they pose as a group, often in press suits, away from the construction area. This trend demonstrates a desire not to be associated with the manual labor which the Indians completed, often under the direct supervision of the Europeans. However, in the exhibit marked number 10 of the Bengal-Nagpur Railway Construction Collection by J.C. Townshend, we can in fact observe what appears to be a European within the construction area. What is notable, though, is that this appears to be a more candid photo, unlike the previous photographs which poses were offered. The nature of this image suggests to the viewers that what is intentionally presented to the audience via the work of the ethnographers is perhaps an inaccurate description. As a result, this causes us to question the validity of all other work which is offered by the artist. If some of it is misleading, how do we know which are accurate depictions and which are not? The fact remains that this practice of ethnography amongst a certain population can, under certain circumstances, directly affect the condition and well-being of said populations. Specifically, the presence of the ethnographer, a foreigner, within a usually vulnerable population, and how his or her decisions or indecisions often result in significant consequences for the population of interest. Obviously, in the end, the ethnographer chooses what he or she will or will not write, will or will not show, will or will not report or capture, and so on. These decisions, while perhaps seemingly insignificant initially, produce harmful and oftentimes inaccurate perceptions of the studied group. The manner in which the ethnographer chooses to depict certain groups relative to others can have often material and even long-lasting consequences.
Like with the previous picture, this one from the railway also shows that the European engineers weren't quite as well dressed and tidy as the artist would want you to believe. They're working alongside the Indians, they're dirty, and really you have to look closely to be able to differentiate who is Indian and who is European. It's also that many of the Indian workers were just as well dressed as their European counterparts. This all leads back to the colonizer power structure that was so deeply ingrained within Indian society, and one that many ethnographers played a part in. In fact, British colonizers were almost obsessed with studying and observing Indian culture, yet at the same time trying to define it in their own demeaning way. Britain desperately attempted to create a coherent social order in India as they colonized it and understood it through ethnographic methods to be able to control it. Britain attempted to label India's social classes through different avenues to make Europe seem like a greater society.
While taking place in a different nation, the fundamental principles of ethnography remain the same. The audience must always take into account that we are only seeing one moment among countless others. However, this image, the Mexican miners' strike of Cananea, Mexico, by the Great Western View Company, is particularly symbolic in that it depicts a group of lemmings literally on a lower platform from ostensibly their overseers. What's more, those dissenting, we can assume the marginalized group, all appear to be one entity. One of the most principal consequences of ethnography. Collecting this image in this manner at this specific time subsequently renders those with grievances not as individuals, but rather as a hostile and aggressive mob. In addition, it demonstrates a literal clash between two warring factions, wherein the socioeconomic differences between the two are clear.
Here we can see two photographs, the first being General Don Porfirio Diaz, Presidente de la República Mexicana de Cruces, taken in 1910. We can recognize a common theme in ethnography here. Those in high power, such as the man depicted, portraying themselves as having high status, with a fancy uniform, straight posture, and a stern look. General Don Porfirio Diaz wants his audience to recognize his high power, position, and authority. To the right, we can see the photograph entitled Man Carrying Corn Stalks, taken in the year 1897. Again, we can see the drastic contrast between the photos, as the man on the left is pictured hard at work, with clothes that appear to be less formal and almost rag-like. In addition, there's symbolic value in the depiction of the man being literally consumed by the burden of his labor work. Today, anthropologists can better understand the rich history of the indigenous peoples of Mexico through these photos, as well as bridge gaps that have been left open by analyzing ethnographic photographs. These gaps include the harsh reality that ethnographic images hide many of the harsh realities they faced, including exploitation, extreme violence, racism, classification, and injustice. Ethnography was based upon the perception of these indigenous groups by their colonizers. These perceptions led to the classification of indigenous peoples, ultimately labeling them as inferior to their colonizers.
One thing that is clear within the photos is that there always has been and always will be a difference in how people get portrayed and how this same portrayal will affect them and their social status. In the picture showing Francisco Madero and his associates, they have no weight on their shoulders. They're standing tall with power in their chest and no worries in the world, because they are at the top of the pyramid looking down on those below. Comparing that to the picture, men carrying bags of grain, they are being held down by their status. They have to do this labor to survive, and in turn is what is putting weight both literally and figuratively on their shoulders.
By analyzing digitized photos, students can look deeper into the context and better understand the true history behind them. For example, photography was used in the 1800s for the colonizers to document Indians as the way they want them to be perceived, rather than documenting the reality of their culture and people. By incorporating discussions surrounding these photos in this class, we as students can better understand that these photos were made in the subjective eyes of the British and Spanish colonizers.